On the nights when he called her mine, the world seemed to stop. But when the sun rose and society's eyes opened, he erased her name like someone wiping dust from the floor. She knew every excuse, every silence, every time he left her alone in front of her mother, her friends, the distinguished guests who came to dinner and ignored her as if she were part of the furniture. And yet, she stayed. She stayed for love, for hope, for those secret moments when he said she was the most beautiful secret he'd ever had. But secrets get tiring, and so did she. Because the day came when love was no longer enough, and she left silently without warning, without making a scene. And she took with her something that neither he nor his money could ever buy back. He didn't realize it right away. He thought it was just a gesture, a stubbornness, that she would come back as always, after the next whispered request, the next, "I'm sorry, I'm just trying to protect you." But the days turned into weeks, and her absence began to hurt in ways he never imagined it would. In his ego, in the silence of the empty house, in the absence of the eyes that saw him whole, even when he hid behind labels and expensive suits. He tried to call her, but the number no longer existed. He tried to look for her, but she had left no trace. And then, when he thought he had forgotten, he saw his own name printed in the newspaper, and a delicate signature, beneath a truth he had fought his entire life to hide. That was how he discovered that loving someone in secret has a price, and that there are secrets that come back, so that the whole world knows. If this story has already caught your attention in the first few seconds, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It makes all the difference in helping more people find stories like this. In the immense mansion with white columns and mirrored glass windows, the silence of the early morning was broken only by her bare footsteps on the marble floor. She always wore the same smooth shoes, the same careful movements, the same routine of mopping while everyone slept. That was how he saw her at first, as part of the order of the house, as an efficient and discreet figure who cleaned his world without asking for anything. But that night something was different. He approached, leaned against the wall with a glass in his hand, and said, in a voice lower than the air, "You are the most beautiful secret I have ever had." She looked at him without smiling, not because she didn't feel it, but because she already knew. She knew that it would always be that, a secret. They stood there still for a few seconds that lasted an eternity. He approached, touched her face, and for the first time, she didn't look away. The kiss came with fear and guilt, but also with tenderness. She trembled more with shame than with passion, because he loved, and he already knew that this love would only be lived in corners where the light could not reach. The next morning, when he came downstairs, he didn't even look at her. His mother was drinking coffee, the guests were talking about politics, and she was silently cleaning the crumbs from the table, as if she had never felt his lips. It was at that moment that she understood. No matter how many times he said, "I love you" at night, when the sun came up, she would just be the girl who cleans the floor. She swallowed hard, finished her work, and went down to the basement, where she cried hidden among the buckets. But she came back at the end of the day. She came back because he asked her to. She came back because his voice said things that his eyes denied. She came back because she believed once again that maybe he saw her. And for a while she really did believe it. When they were alone, he was sweet, affectionate, vulnerable. He made coffee for the two of them, asked her to stay longer, said he was afraid of losing her, and she melted. But all it took was someone knocking on the door for him to become a different man, one who ignored her, treated her as if she were invisible, like a secret too beautiful to tell. As if loving a simple woman was a mistake he preferred to hide behind excuses. She remembered exactly the first day she set foot in that house. The ad said, "Reliable cleaning needed for a family home on Long Island," and she needed the job. The uniform was simple. The instructions were many. The owner of the house spoke softly and coldly, as if she had no expectation of being contradicted. And he just appeared on the stairs. His white shirt rolled up to his elbows, his expensive watch on his wrist, and his gaze seemed to care nothing. When their eyes met, there was no magic, just a restrained, uncomfortable moment. She lowered her eyes and kept cleaning. He kept going downstairs, pretending not to notice. But that same day, before she left, she found a note attached to the bottle of water he had left on the table. "I appreciate your kindness." It had no name, no signature, but she knew. The following days were silent. He spent little time at home, but whenever she was in the kitchen, there was a new hidden note. Sometimes a sentence, sometimes an unanswered question. She began to wait for them, and even without understanding why, she kept each one in a makeshift box inside the broom closet. When he started showing up earlier, she noticed. He didn't say anything, but he stayed close. Sometimes he pretended to be reading on the couch while she cleaned. Sometimes he made up phone calls near the stairs where she was scrubbing the floor. One afternoon, as she was climbing the stairs with the wet cloths in her hands, he stopped in front of her in the hallway and said, "You shouldn't look so pretty in this room." She blushed. She didn't know what to say, and in that moment, she felt for the first time something she couldn't explain. Fear, desire, shame. He began to come down to the kitchen every night she worked. Overtime, never with an audience, always in silence. Once he offered her coffee, the other time a piece of cake. She declined the first 2 times. The third time, she accepted. They sat at the marble table. He talked about his childhood, his studies, the pressures of maintaining the image of a respectable family. And she listened attentively, but without allowing herself to believe him. He seemed like someone with too much world on his shoulders and too many empty eyes in his face. He was handsome, yes, but he carried something that she would only understand later, a pride disguised as fragility, a need that fed on the power to conquer what he could not have in public. The 4th time they met at night, he touched his fingers to hers and said, as if speaking to a ghost, "You make me feel clean." She didn't know if it was a compliment or an insult, but it stayed with her for days. And it was at that point that she began to allow herself, not out of naivety, but because of something that every woman who loves too much knows, the hope of being an exception, of being someday introduced, seen, chosen. She didn't know it yet, but that desire would be the one that would hurt the most. The first time he kissed her, it was as if time had paused for a second before moving on. They were in the laundry room on a sultry late afternoon while she was folding the sheets, and he said he needed to talk to someone who wouldn't lie. He approached her slowly, placed his hand on her face and asked if he could. She didn't respond with words. She just didn't pull away. The kiss was slow, full of fear and repressed desire. She felt her skin burn, not from passion, but from the knowledge that that gesture would be covered in silence from then on. And it was. The next day he passed her in the entrance hall and didn't even look. That night, however, she found another note, this time inside the bucket of cleaning products. "I saw you all day. I just couldn't show it." She started arriving earlier, not on her boss's orders, but to see if she could find him alone. And he, as if he could read her mind, began to adjust the schedule. They started to meet without making arrangements, sometimes for 5 minutes in the basement, sometimes for 10 on the back porch. Never in bedrooms, never in beds. It was as if their desire needed to be hidden even from the house. He hugged her tightly, as if he needed to hold on to something real. But at the same time, he whispered that it couldn't leak out, that no one would understand, that his world was made of ancient codes. And she believed it. Each hug became a pact of silence, and each silence made her more trapped. When he held her hand tightly, he said he had never felt so much peace. When he rested his forehead against hers, he confessed that with her, he felt he could be a better person. But those words never crossed the front door, because as soon as his mother came down for breakfast, he would stiffen his face, cross his arms, and treat her as if she were invisible. One time she had placed the flowers on the table before the guests arrived, as she always did. He walked into the living room, looked at everyone, and said harshly, "These flowers are crooked. Clean them up." She didn't answer. She just lowered her head and removed the arrangement. That night he appeared in the laundry room and apologized. He said it was stress, that she was the only thing that kept him breathing. And once again, she forgave him. They began to see each other almost every day. He began to leave her books with passages underlined. She wrote him notes back. It was a silent, clandestine love, but full of words that would never be said in front of others. She kept everything in a wooden box with a cracked lid and a red ribbon. With each new message, the box seemed to weigh more, as if a love grew inside it that, however real it was already born, condemned to be secret. And yet, she believed that one day, just one day, he would call her mine in front of the world. That was all she wanted, to no longer be a secret. But that was exactly what he didn't know how to offer her. That day seemed like any other, but she woke up with a knot in her chest. She arrived early, tidied the rooms with more care, smoothed every crease in the sheets as if trying to find order in the chaos she felt inside. He had disappeared the day before. He had not answered the note. He had not appeared in the kitchen. He had not left a trace in the hallway. She tried not to create expectations, but his silence weighed more heavily than any previous absence. When he finally appeared, it was in the middle of the living room, surrounded by guests. He was wearing a dark suit and polished shoes, and next to him walked a woman who everyone there seemed to know. She, the maid, stopped behind the sofa with the tray in her hand and heard his mother introduce the girl as the future daughter-in-law. At that moment, her stomach turned. It was no surprise. He had never promised anything, never said she would be introduced or that it was exclusive. But the look in his eyes when he met hers in that room was what hurt the most. He said nothing. He didn't blink. He just turned his face away and kept smiling at the guests. She held the tray steady, served the coffees and left as if she were just another employee. But when she got to the service area, she locked the door and cried silently. The tears came out loud, like something that had been held in for too long. She sat down on the cold floor and felt ashamed of herself, ashamed of having believed him, ashamed of still loving him. That night there was no note, but the next day there was a white envelope on the soapbox, inside an apology and an empty explanation. My mother arranged everything. I didn't choose. It was always like that. He never chose. He just let circumstances decide for him. And she was still there, washing away his choices. But something inside her began to change. She came home early, lay down with her eyes open for hours, and took out of the closet an old hardcover notebook that she used to write down recipes. She began to write down everything she felt, every gesture of his, every sentence, every pain that she couldn't tell anyone. She started calling it a diary, but over time it turned into a testimony, a record, a confession. As she wrote, love seemed to change places. It stopped being in her and began to inhabit the words. It was as if by writing she recovered something of herself that had been lost. She also began to write down the moments of humiliation, the cutting phrases, the fake looks, the quick kisses that were coldly erased the next day. Even the pitying looks from the other employees. They all knew, they all saw. No one said anything, but the silence was a kind of compassion. Time passed and the notebook grew thicker. Words became a shield. It was where she cried without being seen, screamed, without making a sound, remembered without blaming herself. And then came the day he tried to kiss her in the warehouse, and she pulled away. She said she was tired. He didn't understand. He asked her if she was angry, and she just answered, looking him in the eye for the first time in a long time, "I'm tired of being a secret." He tried to smile, thought it was a phase. He said she was too sensitive. But that night, she wrote one last sentence in her notebook before going to sleep. "Today, my soul began to say goodbye." She returned to work the next day with dry eyes and a numb heart. There were no more tears, just a strange calm, as if something inside her had completely broken. He tried to approach her twice, once in the hallway, once on the back stairs. But she walked past him as if she didn't owe him anything, and that bothered him more than any argument. Used to having everything under control, including the time and her silence, he began to pick up the pace. He sent messages on her old cell phone that she rarely answered. He left notes at the laundry room that she never picked up. He called her by name, but she responded only with professional gestures. It was as if he had lost access, and the truth is, he had. It was on a Sunday afternoon that the scene became unbearable. The house was full of important guests, the table was set with refinement, the dishes were positioned with precision by her. Everything was perfect. But when he entered the living room and saw her arranging the last flowers in the central vase, his mother said with disdain in front of everyone, "That's all that girl knows how to do. That's why we keep her around. Discreet, silent, and cheap." She swallowed hard. No reaction, just a slight tremor in her fingers. He was there on the other side of the room. He heard everything. He saw everything. And he didn't say a word. He pretended to answer the phone, turned his back, and let his mother continue with the guests. That night, she arrived. Home, took off her uniform and carefully placed it in a box. Her diary was on the table. She opened it, rereading old passages, as if she were reviewing a life that was no longer hers. And then she wrote something she had not written before. "I deserve to be seen." This sentence was not just an observation. It was a warning. She knew that she would not have the courage to leave the next day, or perhaps the following week. But something in her body, in her breathing, already carried the certainty that she was counting down. At home, he began to feel restless. He tried to recreate moments, to bring back memories. One day she showed up with a gift, a book of rare poems that she always said she liked. Another day, he brought her a coffee he had made himself. But everything seemed late, out of place, as if he were trying to feed a fire that had already died out. She thanked him politely. She didn't reciprocate, and that hurt him more than any words. For the first time, he felt like he was about to lose something he didn't know how to hold on to, and he began to act with disguised desperation. He began to watch her more closely, asking what she was doing after work, offering her a ride, asking about her feelings, something he had never done before. But it was too late. Her notebook now had a second part. There she no longer wrote about him, but about herself, plans, thoughts, dreams. She began to study at night, silently, with borrowed books and online videos. She obtained new documents, researched courses. She began to sew old clothes to sell at local markets. No one knew, not even him. It was her way of preparing for her own departure, without noise, without an audience, without drama, only with truth. Because at that point in the story, she had already understood. He wasn't hiding her because he was afraid of others. He was hiding her because he was ashamed of her. And those who are ashamed of what they love don't know how to love. The following week, something changed in her gaze. Although her gestures remained soft and her voice was low, there was a new firmness in each step. She no longer looked at him as before, nor did she wait for his invitations or notes, as if she were waiting for crumbs of sunshine. Now she walked past him serenely, as if she had made peace with her own decision. And this, for him, was like a silent wound that grew day after day. He tried to win her back with beautiful words, phrases that used to dismantle her. But she only smiled and continued her work. He was not used to being ignored by those who loved him. Her coldness left him restless, lost, like a boy who had lost the only compass that guided him in the chaos of his own life. It was then that he tried to resort to the old game. He began to show up with gifts, expensive perfumes, and books signed by renowned authors. One night, he left a necklace on the kitchen table with a note saying, "To remind you of who you are to me." She looked at the jewelry, closed the note without replying, and the next day left everything intact in the same place. At that moment, he understood. She didn't want things. She wanted respect. She wanted to be seen, not possessed. She wanted to be called mine in front of everyone, not the employee who does a good job. The final straw came at a Sunday lunch. The house was full, family members were chatting on the porch, and she was called to help serve. He saw her walk down the hall with the tray in her hands, her back straight, her expression neutral. And yet he did nothing. He pretended not to see her. He pretended there was no love there, no history, no memory. As she walked past him, she felt a bitter taste rise in her throat. It was the last time her heart wavered. Because that same afternoon when she returned home, she didn't just write in her diary, she wrote what she would do next. 2 days later, she handed in her resignation letter. She didn't explain her reasons. She didn't ask for recommendations. She didn't cry. She simply thanked him for the opportunity, as if she were just another employee. He turned pale when he heard the news. He tried to talk to her. He told her that it was crazy, that she was interpreting everything wrong. But she no longer responded to his manipulations. "I just want to leave in peace," she said. And she did. He tried to follow her to the door, to beg her, to make promises he had never made before, but she didn't stop. She didn't even look back. She left as lightly as she had come in, but with her heart intact. And in her bag only two things, her diary and her dignity. In the following days, the house seemed different, too silent. He searched for her perfume in the rooms, for her light footsteps in the hallway, for the presence that was invisible to others but essential to him. He found nothing, and the more he searched, the more he realized that he had lost not only a woman, but the only truth he had in life. And he realized, too late, that by hiding her from the world, he had deprived himself of the only true thing the world had given him. He tried to go on with his routine, as if nothing had happened. He told himself it was just a phase, that she would be back in a few days. She always did. She loved him, and he knew it. But time began to show that her silence was different, more firm, more genuine. On the first weekend without her, he spent hours staring at the kitchen door, waiting to hear the footsteps that always came, before the coffee was ready. He missed the details he had never appreciated, the way she folded the napkins, the way she looked at him when she thought no one was looking, the quick touch of her fingers when she handed him a cup. Everything seemed empty, as if the scenery was the same, but the soul of the house had gone with her. He tried to find her. He called her old number, which no longer worked. He sent messages that were never read. He called one of the other employees and, in a low voice, asked if they knew where she was. The woman simply replied, "She didn't leave an address, she just said she needed to take care of herself." He insisted, but realized that no one would make way for him to reach her, and that disoriented him. For the first time, he was in the place of the one waiting. And waiting, for someone used to controlling everything, was a slow punishment. The nights became long. He began to wander around the house aimlessly. He climbed stairs without knowing why, opened drawers, rummaged through cabinets, until he found behind a forgotten box of products the red ribbon, the same one she used to hold the diary together, but the notebook was no longer there. Only the ribbon, forgotten or left on purpose. He would never know. He held it in his hands for a while. It was simple, made of worn fabric, and yet it was worth more than any gift he had ever given her. There was proof that she had left in one piece. She had taken what was hers. She had left only what didn't matter. He tried to distract himself with work, with events, with new women who his mother said were ideal for his social status. But none of them looked at him the way she did. None of them understood his silences. None of them were able to see behind his pose. And the more he tried to replace her, the more he missed what he had lost. He began to walk the streets of the neighborhood where she said she lived. He went into small cafes, hoping to bump into her by chance. It never happened. She had disappeared like a well-kept whisper, like a secret that suddenly refused to be remembered. And that was when he realized he never really had her. Because loving in secret is not love. It is possession disguised as fear. And now he was just a man surrounded by luxury, with a gold ring on his finger, and a void that not even time knew how to fill. On the other side of the city, she began again in silence. She rented a small room in a modest boarding house where she shared the kitchen with other women who, like her, carried stories that no one asked about. She spent her days selling hand-sewn pieces at a local market and her nights studying. She enrolled in a technical course in interior design with the little she had saved over the years. She never told anyone where she came from or who she had loved. She kept everything in her diary, which now had firmer, more vivid pages, more hers. She wrote with a clarity she had never had before, and for the first time, she felt my chest breathe without fear. But even from a distance, he kept trying to find her. He discovered the little market and went there once in disguise. He saw her from afar, selling dish towels with hand-embroidered flowers. She was beautiful, but not like before. She was serene, whole. She had a new sparkle in her eyes, the kind of sparkle that only appears after pain becomes strength. He didn't have the courage to approach her. He stood behind a stall, observing, like someone watching something. They once had and let slip through their fingers. He wanted to call her, tell her he was sorry, that now he would do everything differently. But he realized he had no right. She had moved on. And he was still trapped in his own cowardice. That night, she felt something strange, as if someone had been watching her. She got home, lit a candle, opened her diary and wrote, "His absence no longer hurts me, but his invisible presence scares me." It wasn't anger. It was an echo, a residue of the love she had to bury. And even with her heart calmer, there were memories that knocked on her door sometimes, like the smell of coffee from the mansion's kitchen, or the sound of muffled laughter at parties she only heard and never attended. Still, she chose the present. Real life, new friendships, sewing afternoons, the freedom to walk the streets without having to lower her eyes. Now, she no longer needed excuses to exist. Meanwhile, he was collecting failed attempts. He began to write and delete messages. He drafted letters that he never sent. In one of them, he said that she was the only true person in the midst of the drama of his life. In another, he confessed that he was ashamed of himself for never having defended her. But he tore them all up before finishing, because deep down he knew it wasn't for lack of opportunity that she left. It was because of too much disappointment. Time passed. He continued to hide behind appearances. She continued to reveal herself, page by page, word by word. They never spoke again. They never crossed paths again. But at that point there was no more pain, only a silent certainty. Those who do not have the courage to love in the light of day do not deserve to be remembered in the night of longing. Time passed as it does when life no longer waits for anyone. For her, the days began to have a different rhythm. She woke up early, drank the strong coffee she had learned to like on her own, arranged the fabrics on the improvised clothesline on the balcony, and between one sewing order and another, dreamed of having her own studio. It was no longer about forgetting. It was about transforming. She still remembered him. It would be impossible to completely erase someone who had once been a home, even in the shadows. But now, remembering it didn't hurt. It was like revisiting a book she had read a long time ago, a beautiful book, but one that should never have become reality. From this side, he seemed increasingly tired. He tried to keep up with business, appearances, and a busy schedule, but there was always an empty space, like a hallway in the house that no one enters, but everyone knows is there. One day, passing by the mansion's old laundry room, he felt a strange tightness. The smell of the products, the muffled sound of the old radio she used, it all seemed to have become embedded in the walls. He sat there, alone, among buckets and rags, and for the first time he cried. He cried like a man who understands that he has lost not only a woman but himself with her. Meanwhile, news of the scandal began to spread. A leaked document, an anonymous tip, internal details of fraudulent contracts that linked the family company to long-standing overbilling schemes. His name was written between the lines. And the strangest thing, no one knew where the evidence had come from. They were very specific, precise, old records, some with dates that coincided with the years she had worked there. He knew right away. Not because he was sure, but because his body knew, like someone who recognizes the touch of a truth that he has tried to hide for too long. He spent days without sleeping. He searched through files, reviewed papers, talked to lawyers. Nothing directly proved that it was her, but everything pointed to someone who knew the house from the inside, someone who saw too much, heard too much, suffered in silence, and kept it. And that's when he remembered the notebook. The diary she always wrote in. Secret, the red ribbon, the notes, the dates. It all made sense now. She hadn't disappeared. She had simply transformed her pain into testimony. He felt a mixture of fear and admiration. He had never imagined she would go this far. He had never thought she would hold on to so much. He had underestimated her memory, the value of the words he had dismissed, the depth of the silence he had chosen as his response. And now that silence was returning in the form of justice, a justice that did not shout, did not demand applause, did not carry revenge, but dignity. It was the most powerful response she could have given, not to him, but to herself. The news spread like wildfire. Headlines began to appear on business websites, independent blogs, and even in mainstream newspapers. "Anonymous tip reveals internal scheme in the R family," read one. Another, more direct. "Invisible voice exposes the empire's rottenness." He read each word with a dry throat and fixed eyes, as if trying to anticipate the next blow before it hits his heart. The documents released were meticulous. Internal reports with dates, names, times, descriptions of private meetings that only someone in the house could have witnessed. And although the names were hidden in the reports, he recognized every line. It was as if the past had been given a voice. And the voice was hers. In the living room of the mansion, his mother cried not because of shame, but because of scandal. She called lawyers, screamed on the phone, said that someone wanted to destroy everything they had built. But he said nothing. He sat on the leather sofa, his hands clasped between his knees, breathing heavily. Inside, a whirlwind, shame, guilt, regret, and a twinge of silent pride. Because deep down, part of him knew she didn't want to destroy anything. She just wanted someone, for once in her life, to acknowledge her pain. Meanwhile, she watched from afar, not with anger, but with a calm that frightened even herself. There was no pleasure in what was happening. It was not revenge, it was liberation. The diary entries had been delivered anonymously, piece by piece, with the care of someone who did not want exposure, only the truth. She knew it would be impossible to directly prove her authorship, and she liked it that way. She did not want credit, she did not want a stage. She only wanted to know that one day her voice had broken through the wall of silence where he had kept it for so long. He began to have nightmares. He would wake up hearing footsteps, smelling her perfume in the hallway. Sometimes he thought he would see her at the door, back, as a miracle or punishment. It didn't happen. One day, he tried to write a letter, not to justify himself, but to ask for forgiveness. He wrote 5 pages. In the end, he tore it up. He didn't know where she lived. He didn't know if she would read it. And most of all, he didn't know if it deserved to be read. Because forgiveness, he learned late, is not something you ask for. It is something you prove with change. Days later, an envelope with no return address arrived at the mansion. Inside, there was only a sheet of paper with a single sentence. "When you chose to hide me, I learned to shine my light." No signature. But he knew. It was her. There was no doubt. That night, he cried like he had never cried before. Not because of the scandal, not because of the financial losses, but because he understood, in the silence of that sentence, that he had lost the only woman who had ever truly loved him, and that he had lost her not because of another man, but because of himself. In the days that followed, the mansion seemed more and more like a replica of itself. The staircase remained clean, the huge windows let in light, but nothing really shone. The smell of fresh flowers no longer disguised the still air of a house empty of soul. He began to avoid the mirror. He couldn't bear to see his own reflection. It was as if he could finally see the man he had always been, someone too cowardly to love courageously, and too proud to ask for help while there was still time. The newspapers began to cool the case, as they do with every scandal that doesn't fully explode. But the damage was done. His family's reputation had been shaken, contracts had been suspended, and he, more than ever, had become a prisoner of his own inaction. He walked around the house like a ghost. The nights came with a weight that not even silence could sustain. And it was in one of those early mornings that he opened the office closet and found a forgotten wooden box. Inside were some old notes, words she had written back when she was still waiting. "You see me when no one else does. Your silence kills me slowly. If I ever leave, it's because I waited too long." He read each one with trembling hands, feeling the letters burn his skin. It was as if she had left there not just memories, but proof. proof that he was loved with everything she had, and that she chose to treat that love as a disposable secret. At the same time, she lived a simple but fulfilling routine. The little market where she sold her creations had become her stronghold of freedom. Customers complimented her sewing, asked for advice on combinations, and returned days later to thank her. No one there knew her story. No one asked. And she preferred it that way. She had new friends, a small studio built with effort, and a schedule full of orders. Sometimes she daydreamed. Not about him, but about the girl she had been while she loved him. A girl who kept quiet too much, who accepted crumbs, who dreamed of a future that depended on the gaze of others. She felt compassion for that version of herself, but also pride, because she had managed to leave it behind without anger, without revenge, without needing to scream. One afternoon, while she was sewing, she heard an interview on the radio with a well-known lawyer. He was talking about anonymous complaints that had caused big companies to go through a rut. She stopped the needle in the middle of the fabric and listened in silence. When the music started, she took a deep breath, got up, and went to the window. The sky was clear. A light wind blew the curtains, and in that moment she felt that everything had finally fallen into place. Not because someone had paid, but because she had saved herself. On the other side, he continued to see his image slowly crumble. And perhaps deep down he knew the greatest punishment was not the scandal, nor the exposure. It was knowing that when he finally wanted to love her as she deserved, she had already learned to love herself. Weeks turned into months, and over time, the newspapers stopped talking about him. The mansion, once the scene of discreet parties and elegant dinners, became a shadow of its former self. Social invitations became rare, the glances from businessmen in the hallways grew cold, and he, who once thought he had the world in the palm of his hand, now carried the weight of a name that no one spoke with respect anymore. But the most silent punishment was not outside. It was inside. It came in the form of involuntary memories, of the absence he felt in the details, and of a longing he could not confess to anyone. It was on one of those grey days that he decided to walk around the city aimlessly. He wanted to see people, see ordinary places, and feel a little of the life he had always ignored. And on a neighborhood street, with small storefronts and simple facades, he stopped in front of a studio. In the window, dresses embroidered with delicate details and tablecloths with floral designs. He didn't know why he stood there, but something made him go in. The doorbell rang. The atmosphere was welcoming, with the smell of new fabric and freshly brewed coffee. A waitress approached and greeted him. He just looked around, as if searching for a ghost amidst the colors. She wasn't there, but he recognized something. In a corner of the wall, there was a small frame with a phrase embroidered on it. The woman who learns to love herself becomes impossible to forget. He closed his eyes for a moment. He knew it was hers. He felt a lump rise in his throat and had to leave. He returned to the sidewalk with his heart racing. She was alive there, not physically, but in the creation, in the space, in the detail. And there, finally, he understood. She didn't want him to see her as an open wound. She wanted him to know that she had moved on, and that now, where before there was silence, there was art. Where before there was humiliation, there was creation. And where before there was invisibility, there was identity. He returned home feeling lighter, but no less sad, because there, among the stitching and colors, he saw everything she could have been by his side, if he had had the courage, and he also understood, brutally, that she no longer wanted to be sought after. She wanted to be left alone. There was no turning back. There was no more room for his regret in her steps. He could have written 1,000 letters, climbed 1,000 steps of pride, offered her the world. But she had already chosen hers, a world where he no longer fit. And curiously, this did not destroy him. It made him see what he had spent his life without seeing, that to love is to assume in the light what one desires in the dark, that to protect love is not to hide it. It is to announce it, to sustain it, to honor it, and that when you betray the love of someone who only wanted to be seen, the punishment is not what you lose. It is what you can never get back. And for the first time in months, when he went to bed, he didn't think of her with despair. He thought of her with longing and respect, because he understood that she wasn't a mistake. She was a lesson, the greatest that life had ever given him. Months later, on a muggy spring Saturday, he was invited to a low-key show at a small gallery in Brooklyn. An acquaintance had insisted, saying he needed to get out, breathe, see art. He almost refused, but something made him accept. He arrived at the gallery still hesitant, his eyes tired, and his posture more hunched than before. It was a simple space, lit by tall windows and white walls covered in delicate works. The theme of the show, things that have been forgotten. Each piece represented something that time had left behind: unsent letters, faceless portraits, hand-sewn clothes, notebooks open to pages written on in small print. He walked slowly between the paintings, touched by a familiar melancholy, until he stopped in front of the central installation. It was an old table of dark wood, covered with a white cloth embroidered with red flowers. On it lay an open diary. Next to it was a worn red ribbon, the same one he had held years before in his own home. In the center of the table was a frame with the following sentence: "This is the testimony of one who has learned that love, when hidden, becomes silence, but silence when written becomes memory." The author's name was kept anonymous, but he knew. The pages were covered with handwritten passages, phrases he recognized as whispers he had once ignored. "I love you, even when you pretend not to see me. My name will never be spoken in front of others, but it is written on the floor I clean every day." The courage to leave came from the fear of remaining invisible. He stood still for minutes, maybe hours. It was like being pierced by something ancient and profound. There in front of everyone was the secret he had hidden from the world, now transformed into art, into memory, into liberation. And the most brutal thing of all was the realization that, even without saying her name, she had told their story. And everyone was listening. As he left the gallery, the sky was orange and grey. The city continued its indifferent pace, as always, but inside him, something had changed. It was no longer guilt, it was awareness. It was no longer desire, it was admiration. It was no longer an attempt to return, it was acceptance. He knew he would never see her again, that she now lived in another time, in another peace, in a place he could never enter. And that was okay. Because some women, when they break the silence, build bridges that are not for returning. They are for moving on. That night, he arrived home, entered the dark living room, and looked around. Nothing had changed, but for the first time, he took off his shoes, went down to the old laundry room and sat on the cold floor. He picked up a random piece of paper and wrote, "I had the most beautiful secret a man could have, and I hid it as if it were a sin. Today I understand that it wasn't her who didn't fit into my world. It was me who didn't deserve hers." He folded the paper carefully and placed it inside the box where he had once found the red ribbon. He closed it slowly, not as if burying the box, but as if giving thanks. And so, the most intimate and true chapter of his life ended. Without reunion, without applause, without belated apologies, only with the certainty that the love he wasted was not in vain, because she transformed it into freedom, into art, into voice. And he, even late, learned that loving someone in secret is like locking a garden inside a box. One day the flowers die, and all that is left is the perfume of what could have been. If this story spoke to your heart, leave your like so that more people also find this message. Write in the comments. Secrets are also tiring. I will read each one with care. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future stories like this. And now, click on video that is appearing on the screen. He can play even deeper than that. I'll meet you there.